All right, so time to move on to our next session on how AI ML along with RPA can help shape the next gen products. And to present, we have Deepak Padmanabha, Director Product Management, SAP Labs India Private Limited. Welcome, Deepak.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. And firstly, 1.21 GWS, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak here. Let me share my screen.
Yeah, so in the meantime, we have the PowerPoint presentation update from Deepak. A little information about him. He has overall 16 plus years of experience in industry across various domains and roles, specializing in defining, developing, and progressively elaborating large-scale global SaaS products. Areas of experience include new product development, ideation, product strategy and planning, forecasting, go-to-market launches with strong customer focus, and also leading cross-functional teams to plan, execute, and deliver products, working with global customers in emerging and developing markets. So lots to hear from you. Deepak, over to you now.
Thank you very much. Yeah, perfect. So that was already a wonderful session. Thank you so much, Sean. I mean, it was also quite enlightening already to understand about the framework, the governance, including which also includes the people as well as even the adoption. So that is also a very nice segue after you've already heard probably a couple of sessions, one even on the vendor landscape. What I bring to you today is kind of a case study. So I kind of take it a little bit more on the business level, being more from the product side or even the business processes side. I'm trying to bring a case study today on an insurance domain, which we actually did, and how AI along with RPA really help scale this particular system. As already introduced, I'm Deepak. I'm part of SAP Labs India. This is my 15th year here. I'm a product manager here in the area of discrete industry. We take care of industry cloud. And maybe with that, just give me a moment. Let me move on the slides. Yeah. What are we going to cover? So as mentioned, I will first initially set the larger overview of a context of insurance. I will also very briefly, not that you already do not know, but at least very briefly in the context of what I'm going to bring in, give you an overview of AI, RPA, some definitions, but the more crux over here for me would be point 3. How does it help scale the insurance system? I mean, what we did with AI, how it fed into RPA, and what was the final outcome, and so on and so forth. We will even conclude with, kind of an overview there, and hopefully post that we also have some time for questions. If you have any burning questions, you can feel free to stop me. What I can also assure you is we can also do it at the end, because most of the things that I cover might already, bring in few answers already. So without waiting, let me already start giving you an overview of the insurance domain process. Again, something that we all already very much know how it works, but a little bit of an industry overview first. So insurance domain is one of the biggest industry that we deal with, billions of dollars of turnovers year in, year out, and this just continues to grow larger. In millions of customers, if you just take LIC as an example here in India, I think I can bet saying, most of you here in the call already have one or the other policy. The domain in itself houses a huge amount of employees in order to kind of take care of this particular process. And we also need to understand from a larger sense where we come here from a technical point of view is we have an extremely heterogeneous landscape that we already have to deal with. Yeah. So with this kind of an overview, the process fairly straightforward. We submit a claim. To a large extent, certain amount of claims are still paper claims or via an email or something like that. This happens even today. This claim reaches an employee of the insurance company. They log it into the system. The entire determination of the legality of the claim happens, and we have the claim either settled, rejected, or asking him for more information. Fairly straightforward, right? So now, even before I get into what we did, let's get a few definitions out of the way, or even the broad level spectrums of why we brought AI, ML, or maybe used hand in hand, and even RPA, so to speak, its importance and interconnection. So let's start with AI. Artificial intelligence, purely from a definition, reading it out, is an ability of a computer or a robot which is controlled by a computer to do certain tasks, which ideally was done by humans, very much similar to the RPA bots. But there is a level of intelligence and discernment that is here, which you can build here into the system as well. Key thing about AI, I think this is something that we've been hearing in all across our organizations, multiple conferences. It's a big thing for already, I would say, 4 to 5 years now, and this will still continue. But we also need to understand this has evolved a lot since its inception as something intelligent and so on and so forth. So this has really gotten a lot of improvements in deep learning, machine learning, neural networks, and so on and so forth, which we can already put into business process. This is no longer theoretical. It is already optimizing our day-to-day life. We use a lot of our applications, LinkedIn from a professional network, Swiggy in terms of food, Instagram in terms of our social media overdose, even Amazon, for example, where you ideally get related products and things like that. All of these things run as these microservices or bots, which give much more value to the end user. But more looking at it from an enterprise software per se, this is also beginning to already show with AI, with IoT, with RPA. There is a lot of aspects here that we can actually take to the enterprise space as well in order to deliver better for our end users or the customers' end users. Little bit about AI. RPA, I think this is what the whole summit is all about. I don't really want to kind of get too much into details here, but more fundamentally, when we look at robotic process automation, it has to be understood that it's a software technology, which you build, deploy, manage the bots, again to emulate the human actions with the digital systems and softwares. This is more, I would say, a generic run-in-the-mill sort of a definition. The core aspects of an RPA is it is certainly a little bit more than what we know as automation in a generic term. It can use AI ML capabilities, handle a lot of high volume tasks. RPA, the best part about RPA, and even to a large extent, some of the AI infrastructure is it can usually sit on top of an IT infrastructure. So going back to the slide one, where I mentioned about a heterogeneous landscape with insurance, also bringing in the very fact that this particular landscape, you also would be dealing with legacy, probably latest and greatest, and a lot of other systems in between. RPA kind of can be agnostic of it, sit on top. And the most important advantage that we can benefit, and already I think most of us are already using, is the workflow piece of the RPA, which kind of takes out the need of manual intervention or only bring it as and when required, which in turn results in improved fulfillment rate, speed, efficiency, and accuracy. So a little bit about RPA. Now, I just wanted to bring it in again, very much so you will hear about this and probably you've already come across. RPA is certainly above and beyond what we generally say as the generic automation framework, right? So we are all used to Selenium and things like that, the UI automation and so on and so forth. But what makes RPA a little bit more standout and much more, I would say, better is it is a little above and beyond these core automation in terms of where you can derive the design workflows. Okay, without even any web interface, you can directly connect back into any sort of a system. You can build in functionalities such as data entries and things like that. While predominantly, I mean, there are even certain automation frameworks where you can do, but here, ideally, it is not full-fledged as an end-to-end sort of a business process, and with varied or dynamic input and output sort of a paradigm. This is something which is not there with your Seleniums, which RPA brings in. And yeah, I mean, capability to directly talk into the backend system, capability to connect into any other system which is AI and ML outside of the available space is also one of the crucial things that we need RPA for. Yeah. So now, with that context of understanding what is the insurance as a process, what is RPA and AML in this particular context that I'm deriving. So now I would like to kind of bring you to the processes where AI and RPA, AI and RPA can actually help an established process of claims of insurance make it better. Yeah. So largely here, if I break down whatever I showed as a simplified process, making it a little bit more business oriented for the AI and the RPA space, we can break it into 5 steps. In each of these 5 steps, I will concentrate on the AI piece and the RPA piece, what was done in as a part of this particular case study with the customer, how it benefited, and which can give an overview. So the 5 steps are ingesting the document. So this is where once you get the claim, what you do with it, validating the claim. Okay, and again, the validation also has a couple of additional steps where this can come in terms of verification and even finalization of a claim. So you also continue on that. Fraud detection, a very very key aspect, which is again I think a very very huge industry in itself, so to speak. And finally, the payout. So as mentioned, in each step, as I move forward, I will break down the AI piece, or you can call it ML, which can be used hand in hand. And I will also break down more from a RPA piece. So let's start. Um, Ingesting the document. So fundamentally, what does ingesting the document mean? Here, we have already received the claim. What do we do with it, right? I mean, do we put it in the system? What happens, and so on and so forth. So here, from an AI piece, one of the key things is identification of the document in itself. Like, if you do not want a human intervention and things like that, you have to identify who is the claimant, who is actually raising this particular claim, and in order to even start the process, whether this person is still there, whether he has a valid insurance policy, anything that you need to check starts here. So this would be, I would say, a basic natural language solving sort of a problem. We use NLP in terms of entity recognition and so on and so forth, which can already give you this information. And what happens? This is fed into an RPA system, or of course, they work hand in hand. Like want to call together, but probably a more Indianized term here would be as a jugalbandi, so to speak. So RPA gets this particular information, a bot kicks in, or we can always prepare a bot which verifies. Okay, claimant is Deepak. Is he in the system? And if he's in the system, is there already a claim? Okay, if the claim is already in process, it tries to check whether it has all of the supporting documents. If it's a new claim, it starts off by creating a particular claim in the system, backend system. And if the information identified by the AI system is not of high confidence, as you all know, any AI system, we can always derive the amount of confidence that it has in terms of its output. So depending on that as well, RPA system can always build in the human, but over a period of time, as and when we grow, improving the models, both on the AI and the RPA front, this can be reduced. This is step number one in terms of ingesting the document. Now, from a validation point of view, this is where it starts to get a little bit more interesting. Depending on the type of claim from an AI block, you certainly would need different kinds of documents. So identifying the type here in combination, with a computer vision or an NLP and various other machine learning models becomes very important. And, this is fed here into the RPA bot, which starts now to take this information and starts to make some decisions. The decisions would, invariably be if all the requirement of the documents is provided to file the claim, if in itself a policy is still valid, if it is, coming to the end of the date and things like that, that is also something that you can check. But purely looking at it from the documents in itself, based on the type, if there are missing documents, it can already be fed back into the claimant saying, hey, your process is incomplete. Why don't you check for giving all of the information? Maybe even specifically, the bot can even identify saying what is there. And in case of already existing claims and all of the documents have been processed, the RPA bot moves on to the next step, which would be the verification. Note there is an important aspect that is brought here by this coordination of AI and RPA system is something called as transparency. So this is one of the biggest impacts that was already seen. Some of you or most of you would have already gone through some or the other sort of claims of insurance, whether it is vehicle, whether it is health, and so on and so forth. We always realize that it is a bit of a black box system. And with the usage of these and with RPA doing its, separately on top of this particular system because of its complex architecture, infrastructure, you can actually derive this at an early point of time. And let's say, as an example of a missing document, you don't really have to wait for certain days. As soon as the RPA bot kicks in, it can straight away send an email, or even, via an SMS gateway. If it is configured, you can get an SMS already that, hey, this is the stage you've not, serviced all the documents. Usually, the only other piece that we get is the status change. But here, even the intermediate status, the transparency is something that we can build. That's on the validating front. Um, Moving on a little bit on the verification and the finalization, right? So far, we've just seen who's the claimant, what is the type, whether the documents were there. But now, this is where probably when, the technology being moving forward, it becomes a little bit more serious and harder. But we can also manage to cover, whether the coverages are understood, whether it is the part of the policy, and the final details of the policy, the terms and conditions. Usually, that goes pages together. Here is what the AI system can actually derive that, even from the policy of the claimant, and then feed it into the RPA. But again, note here, this is again an evolution of a process. So this would take some time before we train the AI models here. And that is where I mark here that, mistakes in this particular system actually would have dire consequence, because overall we might lose that entire value that this provides. So again, this would certainly would require some time. I can assuredly tell you that, is this already possible? Yes, certainly it is, right? And again, the advancement of the field of AI itself can also help us here with, newer models in better understanding of the data, and kind of using that to our benefit. So that is on the AI front, on the verification and the finalization. And RPA here, given this is, a complicated task. So RPA bots here have, a lot of work to do. They have to fetch the appropriate information. Okay, this is the coverage. Is this the policy from the underlying system? Provide them back and forth to the AI system. Based on the predictions and the confidence levels of the AI system, the RPA bots can be configured to see what is the next step. For all the next step could also be involving humans saying, okay, not so confident. The information is there, but we really don't know whether it's the last month of the claim before the insurance has to be renewed and things like that. All of this human intervention can always be kind of requested for. And the RPA bot parallelly can also start some sort of a conversation even with the claimant itself, saying, okay, this is what is happening. We are still not very sure. Can you feed us more information here and there? So what we need to understand more fundamentally is, here it's complicated. It's a non-linear process. So there is a lot of back and forth between the AI and the RPA system itself before the information is further picked by the actual insurance systems in order to kind of move on the particular process. But yes, this would take time. Is it possible? Certainly, most definitely is. So quickly then moving on, from a fraud detection point of view, uh, again, the entitlement piece comes here into picture, whether the particular claimant has one or more claims and so on and so forth. Again, the terms and conditions of the claim in itself or the policy in itself, but this also has to be checked. One of the things that I found out, which was crazy, was fraud claims in US alone is a $40 billion industry. So you can imagine the amount of time people spend in figuring out these loopholes. And that is where, building an AI system which can take care of this and also keep improving becomes extremely important, very much like, the vulnerabilities that we always have, even with the computer networks and things like that. So depending on the type of claim, depending on the amount, previous history, depending on the payment of the installments and so on and so forth, AI system can also kind of determine, or depending again, of course, the logic is built by us, so we can always say, okay, this is too much of a money, or I don't see certain bills, I don't see, so this, it can determine some sort of a value which says whether it is inclined towards fraud or inclined towards an actual sort of a release. Again, here, keep in mind, this is how we would configure, and this is also a constant process to keep this up and running. But nonetheless, in terms of the time saved for the generic ones is tremendous. RPA, the fraud status of the claims. Once AI flags, depending on what it sees in terms of the current data, the RPA system can always look at the false negatives appropriate to the claim. It can always bring in humans here who already have this understanding. It can also trigger some conversation with the claimant, or whoever is processing this particular insurance as a human can always also look into it back and forth. This is a piece which ideally is also non-linear at the same time. In this overall entire process, as the fraud piece is an extremely dynamic thing, having humans involved would be also of paramount importance. The only piece where it's always better in order for the closure of the process that we bring in. Finally, the payout here is more fundamentally on a larger front, very much an RPA sort of a deal. Here it's more execution, not really picking any information. So from all these process of identifying the claimant, identifying the type of claim, verifications, validations, fraud detections, if everything has come through, then it's purely an execution from the RPA saying, hey, we can always trigger the payment. Maybe the trigger the payment happens, the RPA bots directly fetches the information of the bank details of the claimant, triggers the payment. It can even update the system. Again, no human intervention required. That, okay, this payment was made, this is the timestamp, and so on and so forth. Send an email or a message. Like I mentioned, this is where the transparency comes through, where even the claimant already knows, hey, you're going to get this, it is already being made. Probably, depending on your bank, you'll receive either today or tomorrow morning. So the full aspect of this transparency of this process can be built in, and take this entire case and make it available for ML models for training for the next cases. So obviously it can even flag up saying, okay, this was something a little bit different than what we have looked before. Maybe we can use for the training of the ML models, even tweaking of how the RPA bots are set up in terms of executing based on these ML models and so on and so forth. And trigger reporting if required. Again, I think we already saw in our previous session as well. Reporting is very critical to look at it, and even from an insurance domain perspective, you can imagine that this would be important. Okay, reporting if it is fraud, or reporting even from a closure, from a region perspective, and so on and so forth. This I would say would be from a payout, or the last step. So all in all, what we saw here is how an AI and an RPA system, which sits fundamentally on top, how they can work together in kind of bridging this gap, making it, I would say, less error prone, less human intervention, at the same time extremely quick. And some of the more critical interconnections or the junctures that I fundamentally see from the AI plus RPA is, for sure, you improve the automation without really changing the underlying system. So your tech, or whichever state that your insurance systems are, legacy, intermediate, extremely new, and things like that, this can already kind of sit on top. Very important, looking at it, such a huge industry. Transparency, again, this highlighted time and again from a claimant perspective. This is something that can be done seamlessly without really even investing in it. So this becomes as a byproduct of bringing in the AI and RPA in itself. And yeah, so what we also moved here, one of the most critical things, again, this is also thinking that we have to bring in if we want to get it to how we solve the problems for our customers, or how we are solving problems within our own companies as well, right? Moving just not just looking at it from a process driven, but moving a little bit more into a data driven sort of a strategy. So it's purely what from an AI system per se, if you see, it's always the data. So it tries to pick in the information, it tries to determine what state it is, it tries to give us some sort of a percentage saying, okay, 80% that this is a fraud, or 20% that this is so on and so forth, which is fed in. But this is what ideally makes this process a little bit more tangible, and looking at these data as how you can proceed with least way of human intervention and even changing your entire infrastructure. I think this is largely, if there is one single key takeaway, I think for me this is what it would be. And yes, another byproduct is also more fundamentally the resilience, right? I mean, again, here during insurance claims, or if I have to take a totally different example, if we build this, for example, with an e-commerce system, we've always seen about certain news about the big billion days of the Flipkarts or even the Amazon Great Indian Festival. Certain times the system's going down and things. So during these peak times, there could also be situations for the insurance domain. Um, let's say what we faced during pandemic, the amount of insurance claims from a health point of view, unfortunately, would have also kind of increased. So bringing in these automations, taking care of certain, basic things via this sort of a, automation which sits on top, which adds a lot of value, provided the company is already kind of invested into it, will completely help during these times, or not only during these times, but as mentioned, this would be ideally as a byproduct. In conclusion, yeah, um, I mean, you can imagine whatever we discussed is not at all one size that fits all. This is a case study from a particular insurance domain with regards to whatever we worked on, what I bring in here, but it would certainly differ based on the company, geography, types of claims, how we are dealing, the regional relevant policies, the governance models, and so on and so forth. Completely understood. But having said that, the underlying, I would say, the fundamentals would not change. I mean, you can always tweak it according to what you want and use them kind of in this jugalbandi sort of a mode to derive a lot of benefit and on your current system. So that would be, I think, the most important thing. You can also see that the AI systems fast creeping into the enterprise domain world. Already probably you have seen there are again a lot of vendors who provide this in terms of niche just only for fraud detections or NLPs and so on and so forth. These are also certain things which can be handpicked, very much like what we saw from, I would say, the RPA vendor landscape. You also have an AI vendor landscape. So RPA bots, moving on, also can work with different AI providers, different systems. So it's now, I would say, a lot of choice that we have, and we can also choose according to what we already saw in terms of governance models and things like that, how we want. But these choices sometimes, when they even work very well together, like for example, let's say UiPath as the RPA, they would also know or probably already bring in certain AI aspects along with it, or if seamlessly works with the AI of Google Cloud, which is TensorFlow or something like that, you already have a winner where you can seamlessly get this in. But yeah, so long story short, you also have a lot of choice in order to kind of build this accuracy of the business process to a very good degree, probably even greater degree than we can imagine. And again, all of these systems can always sit on top of your IT infrastructure. Yeah. So with this, I conclude. I think I'm at the end of my time, but hopefully this case study kind of gives you an idea of the usage. Of course, I didn't get into the technicalities of what in RPA, what in AI. Certainly, this would be, I would say, not a 30-minute session, but probably a 3-day workshop. Maybe I have to do it along with my technical team as well. But at least you can see how they can really already influence and we can derive value out of your overall system. Yeah. So this is what we saw from in summary. And finally, yeah, thank you so much. You can always reach out to me for any questions. We can even open it up for questions if we have time.
Yeah, we do have 4 minutes of time, so please unmute yourself to have a conversation with Deepak. Thank you, Deepak, for all the insights.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Any questions or even feedbacks, thoughts?
Yes, please.
Deepak, this is Rajesh. Probably one thing I would like to know is what is the major challenge you faced when you are integrating AI and RPA?
Firstly, it was a completely new aspect for us. So the challenge was even learning how these systems work well together, Rajesh. Because when we started doing this, which was approximately, I think, two plus years ago, or when we started, the entire base of AI and RPA and they working together was still not very well known. So at this time, bringing them together, we understanding what we are trying to build out of it, bringing in the data scientists, making them understand how these models, AI models work, feeding them into the RPA systems. This certainly was a challenge. But what I can tell you from what I see now, this challenge has been thinned down over the last few months and years because there is much more usage, there is better understanding. I think there is a lot of hand holding. Again, I can always go back, to the example of UiPath, which came in the previous session, where this is made much more better. But at least for us, as I would say, early adopters, so to speak, which is also, I think, one of the sessions that you have up next. That was really the challenge. I mean, we knew what we wanted to achieve. I think this was something which we knew because we worked very well with the customer. We knew the issue, but really solving it took some time, the entire training aspects and things like that. But that was for us, Rajesh.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that.
Any other question for him? Any thoughts, anything that you'd like to? All right. If no, then I'll thank Deepak for your session and time. Please continue to be with us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All. Bye-bye.